One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. Hello and welcome to Investment Banking Insights. My name is Alex Mason and I am your host. This is the show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of investment banking as we go on this journey together. And I'm so grateful that you're here. Thank you for listening. Whether you're on your morning commute or you're working out or doing something else, I'm just so grateful that you've taken time out of your day to listen to this show. And I hope that you're getting a lot out of it too. I'm always seeking to increase the value that I bring to you. So thanks so much. Today, we're going to be talking about discounted cash flow projections. And we know that in our discounted cash flow analysis, by this point, you know that there are several steps. And we're going through these steps and trying to understand what the different components are and why we're doing these things. So today's question relates to just that. Why do you use 5 or 10 years for DCF projections? That is the typical range for DCF projections, but why do we use that range? So we know that the first step in creating a DCF model is to define our assumptions. One of these assumptions is how long the discounted cash flow period is going to be before we assume a terminal value. Remember, we've got these two time phases. We've got from the present to some point in the future, and then from that point in the future to forever. So present value of cash flows in kind of the medium term, and then terminal value. Those are the two components. We add up the present value of cash flows for those two components of time. That gives us the enterprise value and ends our analysis. So how long should that period be? And the answer is, it's all based on certainty and what we can reasonably assume. And 5 to 10 years seems to be kind of that sweet spot. But why is it? Well, if we were to go less than 5 years in projecting our cash flows, it's probably too short of a time period to actually be useful. For example, if we projected, say, 3 years out for a large merger between two companies, that might not be enough time for the combined companies to realize any cost synergies because it takes time to integrate the cultures of two different environments, and maybe there's different reporting structures, and all these things have to happen, and it takes time in the real world for things to happen in a way that they were predicted in a merger model before the deal even takes place. So that's why you don't typically go for very short periods of time, like a couple of years. Now, on the other hand, we have a different problem if we try to project free cash flow more than 10 years into the future. It's kind of like hitting a golf ball. If you've ever tried that, I've only hit a golf ball a couple of times in my life and I'm not very good at it, but I have had the experience once or twice. And basically, if you hit a golf ball a few millimeters differently than from one position to another, it results in a vastly different trajectory of where the ball actually goes many meters down the course. And just like that, it's really hard to accurately project financials far into the future, even if you have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in a year or two. And that's just because the future is so uncertain, especially over long periods of time. I mean, we can barely predict, at least I feel like I can barely predict what's even going to happen in my own life sometimes 1 to 2 years in the future because things change at such a rapid pace, especially these days. But projecting a company's future and a company's financials more than 10 years out is very, very difficult to do with certainty, even if you're working with relatively stable businesses. So that's kind of why we tend to avoid super long periods of time. So that's why that 5 to 10 years is kind of a sweet spot in discounted cash flow projections. We know that we can make reasonable assumptions for several years out, but not too far out. And just a quick anecdote before I end this episode, I actually got asked this question recently in an interview. And after giving my answer, the interviewer tested my knowledge even further by asking a follow-up question. And I don't remember it exactly, but it was something to the effect of, if I have a high growth company, do I want a shorter time period or a longer time period for projecting cash flows? If I have a high growth company, do I want a shorter time period or a longer time period for projecting? And I'm going to ask you, what do you think the answer is? Think about it for a moment. You have high growth. How would that affect how you project cash flows? Well, the answer is that you may want a bit of a longer period for projecting cash flows, because there's a big difference between the high growth rate you see at the beginning of the period and what would be considered a terminal growth rate, which would be a very low growth rate. So in your discounted cash flow model, you don't want discontinuities between the two growth rates. You want this smooth transition because it's better at mimicking reality, or what's likely to happen in reality. So here's what I mean. If you have a high growth company that's growing at, say, 20% between years 1 through year 6, you wouldn't suddenly ramp down the growth rate to 3% in year 7, because that doesn't mimic the economics of how companies operate in most scenarios. Instead, you might have a model where a company is growing at 20% between years 1 through 6, then 15% in years 7 and 8, 10% in years 9 and 10, and then maybe 5% thereafter. And I just made these numbers up, so don't quote me on them. But the point is that you want a smooth transition across the two phases of your model. So for a high growth company, you might need a longer period in order to smooth out your growth rates, since you're starting at such a high growth rate. So interesting question, maybe a little bit more of an advanced question related to this time period topic, but it happened to me in real life, so I figured I'd share with you. Well, that's what I got for you today on Investment Banking Insights. Again, my name is Alex Mason. I'm so grateful for all of you reaching out to me on LinkedIn or by email saying thank you for listening to the show. I really appreciate those messages, and I really appreciate it too when you rate and review the podcast. I really feel the love when you do that, and I'll see you on the next one. We're going to continue going through discounted cash flows. Have a great day.